came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there, Facebook and other everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study. I'm still fixing a couple of things here to try and make sure that we're actually live on Facebook. It just dropped my screen, so I'm not sure what's going on. But I'm glad everybody could join me. I'm trying a new experiment, so this is just a wee bit different. I do have a Zoom meeting open, and I will be taking questions on there, as well as through Facebook. So if you have any questions, please post them in the Facebook. For those of you who are kind enough to join via Zoom, I'll actually have you unmute yourself and talk when we get there. But until then, I'm going to ask you to keep yourself muted, and we'll see how things go. So glad everybody could join me. I hope everybody's surviving the insanity. It's been really crazy lately. If you want to know more of what's going on, please head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. I've been putting up some very interesting articles and videos lately. If you follow the work, you may see, I was after Alan Dershowitz a few weeks ago, and now we're really dealing with a lot of infringement. A lot of infringement on our rights, and my Thursday episodes, I've really been asking some questions about what does it mean and where do we sit and what do we do. So today, I'm talking about the case of First Baptist Church versus Kelly, which we might as well get into. Now, there's an old saying, right? Be careful what you wish for, you may just get it. And I've had a lot of people ask me lately about filing lawsuits against those who've been trashing our rights. People who've been, they want to force masks, they want to force vaccinations, the governors and others officials who've been violating the law, violating their constitutions. Seems like everybody goes right for that lawsuit when they're going after these people. And I'm sure many of you, if you follow the decision at First Baptist Church, you may be jumping for joy, but I think we may just be jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. So let's take a little bit of background on this. And again, I'm going to repeat this because if you have questions on Facebook, post them in the comments. I will try to answer them. I usually do them towards the end. If you're on Zoom, keep yourself muted, please. At the end, when I ask for questions, raise your hand. I'll call your name, and you can actually talk to me. That's what I'm trying out with the Zoom, is rather than just being text back and forth, we can actually have a conversation. Wouldn't that be kind of cool? So let's talk about it. If you're not familiar with this particular case, it's the First Baptist Church of Dodge City and Calvary Baptist Church of Johnson City and their pastor, Stephen Ormond, and Ormond, sorry, don't want to get your name wrong. And the other pastor, Aaron Harris, well, they filed for a temporary restraining order against Kansas Governor Laura Kelly. They wanted to prevent her from enforcing her executive order number 2018, which places specific restrictions on religious activities. Now, the case was filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Kansas as the plaintiffs, the churches and the pastors, were suing for relief under 42 U.S.C. 1983. Now, if you remember a little while ago, I did a video on 18 U.S.C. 242, which is criminal charges for deprivation of rights under color of law. 42 U.S.C. 1983 are civil actions for deprivation of rights under color of law. Basically, they're suing the state of Kansas, the governor, and they're hoping to get some relief, some financial relief out of it. Now, the 42 U.S.C. 1983 complaint is based on the fact that the plaintiffs, the two churches, believe the executive order violated their First Amendment right to freely exercise religion. Now, rather similar to the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus New York City case, Governor Kelly requested the complaint be dismissed as moot because her executive order 2018 had been superseded by her executive order 2025. Little bit of logistic and ledger domain, right? We'll just play a little shell game. We'll just move things around. But the thing is, while Executive Order 2025 did alter some of the restrictions, not on those of churches or religious facilities. Now, since Governor Kelly had issued a whole series of executive orders with varying restrictions on religious activities, the judge in the case, Judge John Brooms, denied the state's request to dismiss the complaint and proceeded with they had a hearing, and eventually he issued an order. So let's look at this idea of the executive frying pan, as I'm calling it. See, Governor Kelly had issued a whole series of these executive orders, these EOs related to the COVID-19 scare. Now, on March 17th, she signed EO 2004, which prohibited mass gatherings of more than 50 people, but excluded religious gatherings as long as attendees can engage in appropriate social distancing. Then on March 24th, she issued EO 2014, which limited that size of gatherings down to 10 people. On March 27th, EO 2016 expanded the list of essential functions to include perform or attend religious or faith-based services. So all the way up to here, churches and faith-based activities are being allowed. They're not being overly restricted. Then on April 7th, 5 days before Easter, as I prefer to call it, Resurrection Sunday, the governor issued EO 2018, which, among other things, added churches and religious facilities to a list of prohibited venues for mass gatherings. Now, while 2018 listed several exemptions for things like airports, childcare, hotel, food pantries, shopping malls, restaurants, bars, grocery stores, and, quote, and other retail establishments where large numbers of people are present, but are generally not within arm's length of one another for more than 10 minutes, it puts specific restrictions on churches and religious services. Now, before I go on, let me pull up I have some quotes I want to share with you. And let me share. Boom. Come on. There we go. So let me quote from the restraining order. With regard to churches or other religious services or activities, this order prohibits gatherings of more than 10 congregants or parishioners in the same building or confined or enclosed space. However, the number of individuals, such as preachers, lay readers, choir or music performers, or liturgists conducting or performing a religious service may exceed 10, as long as those individuals follow appropriate safety protocols, including maintaining a 6-foot distance between the individuals and following other directives regarding social distancing, hygiene, and other efforts to slow the spread of COVID-19. On a side note, I found several typos in this, so if I stumble, I apologize. Now again, continue to quote from the order, to prevail on a claim under 42 U.S.C. 1983, a plaintiff must show the deprivation of a federal right by a person acting under the color of state law. The First Amendment provides in part that Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion, U.S. Constitution Amendment 1. The First Amendment applies to the states by virtue of the 14th Amendment based on Santa Fe Independent School District v. Doe for the year 2000. Now, for those of you who've been following the Constitution study for a while, this is going to sound repetitive. The First Amendment cannot apply to the states. Why? Because, as Judge Broom quoted, the First Amendment applies to Congress and only Congress. Congress shall make no law. Not the legislature shall make no law, Congress. So we have one and only one Congress. That is our federal legislature. But did the 14th Amendment incorporate the First Amendment to the states? Well, the 14th Amendment says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Now, you may be asking yourself, isn't the right to free exercise of religion a privilege or immunity of citizens of the United States? Well, the answer is yes and no. See, while the First Amendment prohibits Congress from prohibiting the free exercise of religion, it does not prohibit it to the states. On the other hand, the 14th Amendment was created after the Civil War to force reluctant states to protect the rights of all American citizens. It did not rewrite or amend the First Amendment to apply it to the states. And neither does a court opinion, in this case, a, quote, Santa Fe Independent School District v. Doe. I find it interesting that, not surprising, Here's a judge that says the 14th Amendment does something not based on what it says, but what another court said. Now, these executive orders do, however, violate Section 7 of the Bill of Rights of the Kansas Constitution. Under religious liberty, property qualification for public office, quote, the right to worship God according to the dictates of conscience shall never be infringed, nor shall any person be compelled to attend or support any form of worship, nor shall any control or interference with rights of conscience be permitted, nor any preference be given by law to any religious establishment or mode of worship. No religious test or property qualification shall be required for any office of public trust, nor for any vote at any election, nor shall any person be incompetent to testify on account of religious belief. So it's a violation of the state constitution. And they did mention that part of this was about state law. Now, during the hearing, the state relied heavily on a case called Abbott. Now, the Abbott case upheld the executive order of Texas Governor Abbott to require that non-essential surgeries and procedures be postponed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the argument in Abbott is based on a case called Johnson v. Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I want to quote from that case. Quote, but it is equally true that in every well-ordered society charged with the duty of conserving the safety of its members, the rights of the individual in respect to of his liberty may at times, under the pressure of great dangers, be subject to such restraint to be enforced by reasonable regulations as the safety of the general public may demand. Now, there's just one problem with this case referring indirectly to Jacobson. You see, in the Jacobson case, there was probable cause that Mr. Jacobson, an American citizen or returning to an American port, may have contracted yellow fever. Right? That's important. There was probable cause. He was on a boat that had an outbreak of yellow fever. And although he did not himself have yellow fever, at the time there was probable cause. Jacobson did not describe a blanket power where the government can violate people's rights for public health, only that they could do so when there is probable cause supported by oath or affirmation that the person is a danger to the public at large. Now, this court also looked at a case called the Church of Lukumi Babalu Ai versus City of Hialeah. Now, in this case, the City of Hialeah attempted to pass an ordinance to prohibit ritual animal sacrifice. In this case, it targeted specifically at the Church of Lukumi. Now, this case is often used as an example of First Amendment jurisprudence. In this case, the court found that the ordinance was not religiously neutral and therefore ran afoul of the First Amendment's free exercise clause. Now, ultimately, Judge Broom found that both EO 2018 and 2025 specifically targeted churches or other religious facilities and therefore was not neutral. Now, at this point, I'm pretty sure there are people out there cheering this victory. You see, but that's not the end of the story. See, what about that judicial fire I mentioned? Well, quoting from the order, it is therefore ordered that the Honorable Laura Kelly, in her capacity as governor of the state of Kansas, is hereby enjoined and ordered to refrain from enforcing the prohibition in Executive Order Number 2018 and Executive Order 2025, prohibiting religious gatherings involving more than 10 attendees, conducted by plaintiffs First Baptist Church of Dodge City, Kansas, and Calvary Baptist Church of Junction City, Kansas, so long as those gatherings comply with the social distancing and public health protocols plaintiffs have indicated in their complaint they are prepared to apply. See, this is where that slippery slope we often talk about, well, it kind of drops off a cliff. Now, if these two churches wish to have services, they must abide by the rules established by the court. Now, did these churches agree to these protocols beforehand? Yes, it was part of their complaint that they would adhere to these rules, but now they no longer have a choice. See, what if the situation changes? What if evidence proves that COVID-19 is not as dangerous as it was once thought? What if the governor writes a new executive order? What if a situation arises that would require a modification to one of these protocols? The churches have voluntarily submitted to a court determining the conditions under which they can hold services. Now, let's take a look at the list of these things that these two churches must do. The protocols Plaintiff First Baptist Church of Dodge City will adhere to include, and by the way, this is from the order. Let's see, prior to and following the in-person service, the facility will be deep cleaned. Invitations will be directed to regular church attendees for this in-person service. Individuals will be advised to continue to engage in stay-at-home protocols as directed by EO 2016 in order to attend the service. Getting a feeling of things that are coming up, oh yeah, you can go to the service, but we want you to abide by the other orders as well. No church members are known to have had any contact with known COVID-19 confirmed cases. Attendees will be advised to perform temperature checks at home on all attendees prior to attending the service. Individuals that are ill or have fevers will not attend. High-risk individuals will be advised not to attend the in-person service. Attendees will be advised to bring their own PPE, including masks and gloves. Attendees will be advised not to engage in handshaking or other physical contact. Hand sanitizer will be available throughout the facility. The in-person service will be limited to 50 individuals in a space that has a capacity for 300 individuals. A cross-shaped auditorium, 50 feet by 74 feet at the center, 2,950 square feet total, allowing almost 57 square feet available to each attendee at maximum social distancing. Cohabiting family units may sit closer together, but otherwise the maximum social distancing possible will be used. However, at minimum, the CDC recommended protocol will be observed with a minimum distance of at least 6 feet. A single point of entry and a single point of exit on opposite sides of the building will be used, establishing a one-way traffic pattern to ensure social distancing. Ventilation will be increased as much as possible, opening windows and doors as weather permits. These procedures will be communicated to church members in advance of the service. Church bulletin and offering plates will not be used during the service. Attendees will be advised to wash their clothes following the service. If church leadership becomes aware of a clear, immediate, and imminent threat to the safety of the attendees or cannot follow the protocols listed above, the gathering will be immediately disbanded. Now, the protocols for Calvary Baptist Church in Junction City are splitting out pews and marking designated sitting areas to keep non-cohabiting congregants at least 6 feet apart before, during, and after the worship service. Marking multiple entrances to encourage socially distanced foot traffic. Propping doors open to prevent the need for congregants to touch doors while entering and exiting the church or sanctuary. Suspending passing offering plates and bulletins. Actively discouraging handshaking or other social touching. Offering hand sanitizer throughout the building. Providing face masks to offer to any interested person. So if the people in these churches want to freely exercise their religion, they have to jump through the hoops established by the federal government, or at least until the court decides on the merits of the case. Now, are the requirements for the church a reasonable compromise with the state of Kansas? Well, from a purely practical standpoint, they may be. In fact, many of these we practice in my home church. We've suspended bulletins. We don't shake hands. We used to have a greeting period. Now we just wave. I mean, these make a fair amount of sense. We also have had, we avoid contact, especially with older people, and we recommend people who are sick don't come to church. So most of these requirements are reasonable precautions to take during a virus outbreak. But should they be enforced by government edict? You see, the compromise does mean the church can remain open, and at least their regular attendees will be allowed to attend. Nonetheless, the idea that any government official can determine when and how you can exercise your unalienable right, well, that's repugnant to me. And the idea that anyone in government can regulate how you exercise your freedom of religion is repugnant to the Constitution of the United States and of the several states. Now, would the judge have issued the restraining order if the churches had not submitted to these proposed restrictions? I don't know. But the fact that I have to ask the question shows just how much we are submitting our rights to the powers of government. In fact, this case reminds me of the words from Patrick Henry. Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. My question is, have these churches purchased their peace at the price of the change of the federal government? So that's the message I've got so far. Where'd my go? Let me stop the sharing here. Where'd it go? Oh, I think my sharing got screwed up. So where are we here? Sorry about that. I think my sharing got screwed up. I'll have the stuff up on the video to make sure that works. So what is everyone thinking? I haven't seen any new comments in the group, but this is one of the places where, when people say, should I file a lawsuit? Well, yes and no. I mean, we have to be careful what we're going to ask the court to approve. Again, I have no problem with these churches actually doing these things. Most of them seem to make sense. Some of them, I think, may be going a little too far, but I don't know the church. I don't know the congregation. I don't know the demographic. I don't know. But I get very worried when you have a government official, a judge, he's part of the federal government. We now have the federal government telling a church, yes, you can exercise your freedom of religion rights of your congregants, but only under these circumstances, at least until I've had a chance to decide what I'm going to do. And I would be surprised, although I try not to make too many predictions, I would be surprised that if this judge does eventually find in the favor of the churches, he doesn't continue these similar restrictions while they're open. So that brings up to me an interesting question, and something to think about. What are you willing to give up? I'm sorry, I'm answering a question online. What will you give up in order to get government's permission to open your church? Now, maybe you don't go to church, your Rotary Club, your Elks Club, your whatever. Do we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Do we have the right to not be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process of law? So, that's the case. On the one hand, I'm happy that these two churches are open, and I'm very happy that the judge made a point of saying this applies only to these two churches. This restraining order doesn't apply to any other church in Kansas, only to those two churches, any other church in the country. But I'm a bit disturbed to say, are we willing to submit our churches to government control? Because if we're willing to submit our freedom of religion to government control, when do we start releasing or submitting our freedom of speech? We've already submitted our right to keep and bear arms. Now we're seeing religion, and we're seeing speech, and we're seeing assembly. What else are we going to submit? When are we going to say enough is enough? And when are we going to realize that courts are part of the government, and we have to be very careful? It's one of the reasons why, if you're ever involved with the police ever take you into custody, everything I've been taught and everything I'll tell you is you say two things. You say, I'm invoking my right to remain silent, and I'll be more than happy to talk to you when I have the assistance of counsel. And then you shut up. Because whatever you say can be used against you. And here, I'm sure the churches, and again, I don't know these people, but I'm sure they said, listen, we are willing to practice social distancing. We're willing to do these things. Thinking, well, yeah, why would you not, if social distancing is good enough for Walmart, why isn't it good enough for the church? Not realizing that by putting that in their complaint, they've now given the government a reason to say, okay, you can open under these conditions. So I'm glad they're open, but I am concerned about the method, about the precedent we're establishing that, well, the churches can be open as long as the government says so. Michael's watching. He says he can't see me. Well, it's interesting. I see it on the live. Let's see. Why doesn't the judge say to the churches, keep doing what you're doing until I rule? I don't know. And by the way, yes, if you have a question, please, if you're on Facebook, put it in the comments. If you're on Zoom, please let me know in a chat, or where are we here? Yeah, let me know. Let me know in a chat, and I'll call on you, and we can actually have a live one-on-one conversation. I think that'd be pretty cool. That'd be kind of nice. So the question is, why doesn't the judge just say to churches, stay open? Again, I don't know. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what the judge was thinking. But this doesn't surprise me because we have created a habit of courts, well, people call them rulings. This is an order. It's a temporary restraining order, but it's an order. So we've got this mentality of judges can order people around. So why are you surprised when a judge orders people around? Again, I don't know. But judges only have opinions. When a judge, the final opinion of the judge will be a judge. By the way, that's from Josh. But this is a restraining order he's issued. In other words, he's issuing an order from the bench ordering one of the parties to the case to do or to not do something. So this is an order to the governor of Kansas as a part of the case saying, listen, leave them alone. They can be undisturbed. You cannot enforce these orders on them as long as they follow these rules. So yeah, we're into that. Okay, Joanne, you have a question on Zoom. Why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question, and let's see what we got.
Okay, my question is, we have rights and responsibilities according to the U.S. Constitution, and then we also have rights and responsibilities for each individual state. Okay, I'm in North Dakota. Does either one of those constitutions usurp authority over the other one? Because it sounds like the Constitution of the United States gives us more power than the individual state constitution.
Okay, that's an excellent question, Joanne, because it brings up an interesting misunderstanding. Article 6, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution says it is the supreme law of the land. It also says that United States laws made pursuant to the Constitution and treaties made under the powers of the Constitution are the supreme law of the land. But it's important to understand that it's only those rules, only those laws made pursuant, and only those powers, treaties under those powers. But it also says that no law or constitution of the state notwithstanding. So the Constitution of the United States supersedes state constitutions where they overlap. And that's the problem. You see, they're not supposed to overlap. And actually, legally, they don't overlap. The 10th Amendment says any power not specifically delegated to the federal government remains with the states. So there's not supposed to be an overlap where I've got two constitutions in conflict. They're supposed to be side by side. And, things like, coining money and raising a national military and setting standards for the militia, that is specifically delegated to the federal government. Only the federal government can do it. The states can't. However, things like, general public health and everything else, anything not specifically delegated to the feds, remains with the states. Now, what's interesting is you'll find is that when we think of the Bill of Rights and the rights protected there, they're almost exactly duplicated in each and every state. The one exception being freedom of religion. The wording of freedom of religion is slightly different in each state, and they have different requirements, different restrictions. So it's, yes, technically the U.S. Constitution supersedes the state constitution, but it's one of those areas where, the U.S. Constitution says you can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The state constitution says you can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. In fact, I forget where it is, I believe I've read that in the North Dakota Constitution. So I have two constitutions that say exactly the same thing. Does it matter which one's supreme? It's, so it is an interesting question, because the problem we run into is we have all this federal law enforcement and all these federal laws that are trying to regulate things that are supposed to be done by the states. They're illegal. But you see, they have what the courts call dual sovereignty, which is the idea that you have the federal government and the state government are both sovereign over the same thing. That's wrong. That comes from a corruption by the federal government, an encroachment, a usurpation by the federal government on the powers of the states, and the states not standing back up to the federal government. So does that make sense?
Yes. Dustin and I were talking about that. It seems like there was something in the North Dakota Constitution that restricted us in some kind of disease, or like we're going through now, that they have more authority over us than what the Constitution would have. But in order, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, again, I'm going back a ways. I remember working on this with a couple of people. In the North Dakota, I remember North Dakota law or North Dakota, I remember it's the Constitution or their century laws. Under a case of state emergency, the governor is given a lot of power over regulatory law. And that's one of those areas where the federal government doesn't really have any impact on that, right? It's supposed to be like the rules and regulations that come out of the North Dakota legislature. Now, the one area where there are overlaps and where those overlaps are important is usually, like I said, is where you've got the duplication. So the other thing to understand is when the U.S. Constitution was written, it was expected that the powers of the federal, and I don't remember which founding father said this, but the powers of the federal government are limited, and they are focused primarily on foreign affairs.
Yeah.
Right? The powers of the state are not enumerated. They are varied, and they are focused on domestic affairs.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have the things like, so let's take an example. All right, you have what was it? Let's say a stay-at-home order or some other restriction, a deprivation of liberty or of property, right? Because if they tell you have to shut down your business, they're depriving you of the property of that business. Mm. Now, the North Dakota law, as I understand it, it's regulatory. So, they can't come in and say, you have to shut down. What they can do is say, we're suspending your license. We're going to suspend your permission to do business because you have to have a business license, maybe a liquor license or a food safety license or just a general business license. We're going to suspend that because we don't want you doing business during this. Well, both the North Dakota Constitution and the federal Constitution say you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now, due process means it's got to protect your individual rights. And you have a property not only in your business, but in any licenses that you get from the state. Anything that that is part of an interest where you do business, right? The license isn't technically I'm getting a little technical here, and I don't want to get too far off the beaten path. But the point is, both the federal Constitution and the state Constitution say you can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now, you could then challenge these orders under the state Constitution in state court or the federal Constitution in federal court. And the logic of our founders was you would go to state court and you would say, wait a second, the governor doesn't have the power to deprive me of my property, of my business, even with an emergency. It doesn't matter. He doesn't have that authority. If the state doesn't do anything, well, then you can go to the federal government and say, wait a second, I want to sue because they've deprived me of life, liberty, and property. and the state has violated a federally protected right, not just a state protected right, a federally protected right. Again, this gets it gets involved and nasty, in large part because we haven't bothered to hold our judges and court officials accountable.
Exactly.
Remember when I read that the judge said, "Well, Congress shall make law, but that applies to the states." Where do you see that? So it's that, but yeah, it's an interesting question that comes up somewhat regularly.
Okay, no, thank you very much.
You're welcome. How about someone else? Anybody else have a question? Again, I don't think anyone else is on Zoom, but anybody on Facebook with a question, now's the time. Stick your question in the comment. While you're doing that, let me ask you a couple questions. I asked last once, and I want to ask again. Is there a time frame that works better for people? I get a lot of views, but I don't get a lot of live. And I'm wondering, and I'm thinking about, do I want to move this? Do I want to move this to Wednesday? Do I want to move it from 6 Central Time to 7 Central Time? I've even considered doing it on a Saturday afternoon. I'd love to get your feedback, put in comments of a time frame that may generate, some more live interest. Because the other part I want to really, I'd love to have people join the Zoom. And as you just found out with Joanne, by the way, thank you very much, Joanne. It allows a lot more interactive situation when we are able to talk verbally rather than me talking, reading a question and then talking to you. So as I release events for these monthly live streams, there'll be a ticket button where you can actually register and join the Zoom event. So let's see. All right, Josh Russell. Mask orders with school coming. Didn't we talk about this, Josh? Or did somebody else ask me the exact same question through the website not that long ago? So here's the problem we have. The first question we have to ask is, are we talking public schools or private schools? Now, private schools are private organizations. They can set whatever standards are necessary for you to attend, your children to attend that school. If they say you have to wear a mask, you have to wear a mask. Right? That's their right as private entities. Public schools are another matter. They are bound by the restrictions of the Constitution. And the Constitution says you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. By the way, that's the 5th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. So it is a deprivation of your liberty to put conditions on where and how you can go about your business. Right? So okay, Josh, that's kind of what I thought. I think 90% of students in the United States go to public schools, so it's not a surprise. So here's the problem. So just like any other public entity, if they want to set conditions, there's a problem of, well, you want to exercise your rights. Ultimately, though, the state has they have the big stick, right? They have the ability to punish. And if you send your student to school, you send your child to school without a mask, they're likely to get sent home. The question then remains, okay, what do we do? We have to decide amongst ourselves what's more important, our children not wearing masks or our children going to that school. Now, public school has a great advantage. It's already paid for by taxes. There's not an extra expense to it, as if you were to send your child to a public school. If you send a child to a public school, you're paying property taxes either directly or through rent to pay for a government school, and then you're also having to paying for a private school. Or you could do like my wife and I did, and we homeschooled. We decided before we had children that they were not going to public schools. And I've been very happy to see, as time has passed, I found that very helpful. Right, I see what my daughter's grown into, and the fact that she didn't live through the indoctrination center, she didn't live through the animal farm that is the public school system. So, but that was a decision we made, and that decision had consequences. My wife and I agreed that we postponed having children until one of us could stay home full time. Part of the reason was we knew we wanted to homeschool our child. So when she was really young, we didn't want to put her in daycare. We wanted a parent taking care of her. And then when she was old enough to start school, we wanted us to teach her, not somebody else, or at least primarily. So we made sacrifices. We gave up things in order to do that. We have to be willing to do that. And the other thing, which I'm hearing more and more about, is we may actually have to come up with our own underground, our own, I don't want to call it a black market, but our own non-governmental system of doing things. So I deal with several homeschool groups. I speak at homeschool events. And while most people have gone to homeschool because they didn't like what the government school was teaching, we may start deciding that we want to do some more homeschooling because we don't like the requirements that the government is putting to attend a government-run school. Again, we have to make those decisions. We don't always get what we want. So for the deal with the masks are, if it's public school, legally they can't, but I can't imagine, I do not foresee a court in the nation that's going to uphold the lawsuits I hope people bring, that they're being deprived of liberty by being forced to wear a mask when there's no evidence that they are a danger. But there's actually another twist. I've heard this referred to several times. I wouldn't use it myself, all right? But there's an interesting point. The Americans with Disabilities Act says you may have a condition that prevents you from wearing a mask. The Americans with Disabilities Act says you cannot be forced to wear a mask to go into any open business, including government facilities. And HIPAA says that you cannot be asked what that condition is. So I suppose technically a parent, you could write a note that says my child has a condition that prevents that says they should not wear a mask, and according to the Americans with Disability Act, they cannot be denied entrance because of it. And because of HIPAA, you cannot require I disclose to you what that situation is, and send that to the parents and let the government choke on its own regulations. To me, I'd much rather have a constitutional answer to it. But if your decision may be, nope, my answer is I'm sending my kid to school with a note that says they have a condition that says you're willing to lie to the government to do this. That's your decision. I wouldn't do it, but I'm hearing a lot of people talk about that. So we'll see. Let's see. What about mandated masks being worn everywhere? Just asking to fill time. Well, hey, that's very interesting. And it actually has a very interesting twist. I've heard a lot of conflicting information about something, and just hold that for a second. We're back to the same rule. Unless there is probable cause, the government is not allowed to deprive you of your liberty without probable cause. Now that means if you have been tested, if they can show that you've been exposed or otherwise are likely to be contagious, well, then they can quarantine you. And they can say, well, we'll let you out of the house under condition of you wear a mask. But they have to find individually that there is probable cause that you're a danger. The problem with these generic mask messages is there's no due process. They are depriving you of due process under color of law. That means they are subject to 18 U.S.C. 242. They can go to jail for doing that. Now, I wear a mask only when I think it is necessary. In other words, if I'm going somewhere where I'm going to encounter sick people, I might wear a mask. Or if I'm going to someone's house that is a risk group, right? They're older or something else, where I'm going to be in proximity with people that may be at risk, I'd wear a mask, but that's my decision. Now, if I'm out and about without a mask, I'm going to tell the officer, I'm sorry, but you don't have it is against the law for you to deprive me of my right to be at liberty without to be at liberty without due process. Now, if you can find a judge and prove to them probable cause that I am a danger, that I am contagious, you show me that warrant and I will wear the mask. But there's another twist. And I'm still looking for, I've seen data going a little this way. In several states, and I'm iffy about how many, for those of you who carry firearms, it is in several states illegal to wear a mask while carrying a firearm. Now, think about that for a second. Now, I was told my home state of Tennessee is one of those states. However, I'm seeing some information to the contrary, and I'm still working out the details. But that's an interesting situation. If you're in public and you're not wearing a mask and a law enforcement officer says you have to wear a mask, I'm saying I can't, it's illegal for me to wear a mask. Why? Because I have a firearm. Okay, what do? I believe Florida, where my father lives, maybe one, but it's an interesting question, and it's worth thinking about beforehand. So again, I have a right to be out and about. No one has the right to tell me where I can and cannot go without due process of law. And by the way, if a law enforcement officer tells me this, I will warn them that I will call the FBI and open a complaint against them personally for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 242. I think it's only fair. They should be aware that what they're doing is a violation of federal law, because my guess is they don't. So, but again, it comes down to we should think carefully about how far we are willing to go. I know a lot of people who they're not willing to go that far. They're not willing to confront the law enforcement officer who is challenging their rights. Okay. I know a lot of people who, if you believe half their talk on Facebook, they're ready to draw down on the officer that tries to make them wear a mask. I think that's going a bit far. But we have to think rationally, and we should do it beforehand so that we're prepared when it actually shows up, and decide for yourself. But regardless, whatever your decision about wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, how you're going to handle it when confronted, remember this. Remember the elected officials that put these illegal orders in place. And remind everyone you know, when election time, when they're up for election, they issued these elective orders, these illegal orders. Remember that? Remember when your governor issued this illegal order? Remember when they shut your business down? Remember when they harassed you? Remember when they did this? Is that really the person you want in charge when the next emergency comes up? Because if they did it for COVID-19, why wouldn't they do it for the seasonal flu? We're finding that while COVID-19 is fairly contagious to the vast majority of the population, it is not nearly as deadly as we were first led to believe. In fact, they're talking about, do we reopen schools and children, unlike the seasonal flu, children have an extremely low mortality rate when exposed to COVID-19. Extremely, like 1/100th of 1%. I mean, really, really small. Now, that doesn't mean it's nothing, but if we listen to the experts, and I'm using expert with scare quotes because experts have shown not to be that expert, don't we want our herd immunity? Don't we want the people that are most likely to survive this to actually get the disease so they can develop immunity, so it's less likely to spread throughout the population to infect those who are more at risk? We're talking about bending the curve of hospitals, but part of it is I thought we wanted a herd immunity. Why all of a sudden don't we want a herd immunity? So there's a lot going on. So all right, what else going on? Sorry, I'm just seeing what else here. How many freedoms will we give up for promise of our safety? None. Well, I love that sentiment, and I don't question your commitment, but sadly, the vast majority of the people I encounter don't have that commitment. I'm working on my video for next Thursday, or I'm actually going through the Patrick Henry speech. You know, give me liberty or give me death. It's actually a very powerful speech, and it really comes down to the question of, what will you pay for your liberty? There's a saying, you know, everyone has their price. Well, what's your price for your liberty? What's your price for your children's liberty? Now, I'm not saying we should all be idiots. I'm not saying you should be, you know, going out, you know, sneezing and coughing and kissing everybody you see. And I'm not saying government doesn't have a role to say, we recommend these actions. But this collectivist, one size fits all, is anathema to what our founding fathers created. They wanted power local because different communities are different. I live in rural Tennessee. I can't see my neighbor's house. That's a lot different than when I used to live in New York City, stacked several hundred in a single building. Why, you know, this idea that you have to have this one size fits all, to me, it's scary because it's dangerous. Because once, you know, it's that, you know, once government gets a taste for power, once people in government get a taste for power, they don't want to give it up. And we're seeing this is a perfect example of, oh, well, we only want this for a couple of weeks. And then it was a couple of months. And now they're saying, oh, COVID, you know, well, you know what's going to happen everyone was saying, once they start opening up again, once the state starts relieving these restrictions, the COVID rate's going to go up. But the whole idea is we're going to flatten the curve, so we keep the hospitalizations under our capacity. But then what happens? You get a state like California where they start backing off and the numbers go up, and we got to shut it back down again. They become drunk with the power. And it's scary. It comes from, I answered one question earlier this week. Part of it comes from our education system. But I can't blame the education system. It was my parents' responsibility to teach me. It's my responsibility to teach my daughter. And it's my daughter's responsibility to have her, when she has children, to teach them as well. And we have to start taking responsibility. We have to stop letting other people do for us what we're supposed to do for ourselves. Now, there's a couple of things that you may find useful. I'm going to point you to the website, a couple of plugs. If you go to the website and you search for the term placard, Placard, I wrote up this placard. I designed it so that a business could put it in its window, or you could fold it up and keep it in your pocket. And it basically shows the constitutional and statutory basis for the statements I've been making. So, you know, when you're talking about, whether you're talking about masks in public or masks in schools, you can show them, wait a second, here it says right here, you know, I shall not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It says I can't. No, government shall not, not may not. You know, in the Jacobson cases, well, you know, there are situations where, you know, the Constitution doesn't say that. The Constitution says this shall not happen. It doesn't say it shall not happen unless there's an emergency. It doesn't say you shall not be deprived of rights unless a governor thinks it's important. It says it shall not. And it says shall not for one very good reason. Because once you open the door to let government say, well, we're only going to protect your rights under these conditions, they're not unalienable anymore. They become very alienable. The government then decides what rights you have and when they can be exercised. They talk about a vaccine for COVID. The issue I see is it's still a coronavirus. So yeah, Bobby put in an interesting quote talking about the effectiveness of vaccine. Here's another critter you should look at. There's a I posted an article and a video. It's called "Giving Constitutional Scholars a Bad Name," where I basically rip Alan Dershowitz apart because he said, direct quote, "The government, if you won't get a vaccine, the government has the authority to drag you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle in your arm." Those are his words. I rip them apart. We need to know and understand these, because whether or not you think you want the vaccine, that's your decision. But if government's going to start telling you you have to have a vaccine to live, to exist, to go to school, to go to court, to get due process, to petition your government, to go to church, to speak freely, guess what? Those rights aren't alienable. They are no longer unalienable. Our rights are under attack. And everyone is so focused on, oh, I'm scared of COVID. I shouldn't say everyone. The vast majority of the population seems so afraid of COVID, they're not watching. The government saying, oh, COVID, you got to do this. COVID's scary. We're just going to rip your rights right out by the root. We're going to take them away. We're going to show you don't need them. We're going to make you dependent on us. And the vast majority of the American people are falling for the trick. Now, one thing you can do, I mentioned that placard. A friend of mine is actually coordinating classes where we go through that placard and how to apply it in real life. If you're interested, DM me or post a comment, and I will put you in touch with that person. We're doing them over Zoom only because we haven't had enough in one geographic location to worth travel. There's a cost to travel. It's not, to me, it's not a question of COVID. It's a question of dollars. I can't afford to fly up to North Dakota or Pennsylvania or Florida to meet with half a dozen people to talk this over. So I've been doing them on Zoom. But if you want to put one together, we can do it on Zoom. If you can get enough to make it worth me going to your location, I like the idea. I'd love to. So we're coming up on the top of the hour. I try to keep these down to an hour, although I know last month we went a bit over. The times we live in, every generation has had their issues. Every generation has had something to deal with. And I do spend a lot of time here looking at the difficult things, the bad things that government is doing. But I want to take some time to remember, if the American people allowed this to happen, the American people can change it. And I don't need to fix the federal government. That's not the way the system is designed. I want to fix my local government, my county board, my sheriff. I want to make sure those are good so that they can protect me when the state gets out of control. And the state can protect me when the federal government gets out of control. So before you look at the whole big picture and go, I'm just one person, what can I do? I want to remind you two very important things. One is, you're not alone. There are other of us out there. As the Bible says, a threefold cord is not easily broken. It doesn't take a lot of people to make a big difference. And the second is, focus local. If you convince your local businesses that these restrictions are bad and that you'll do business with them if they don't follow that, they get enough of that feedback, they may change their minds. You convince your local elected officials that, yeah, the next time you vote, you're voting based on what they do now. Do they support illegal orders or not? Do they stand in the face of tyranny, or do they fold? You can have a much greater impact on that local official. Because if you take care of your locale and I take care of my locale, we start making more locales better. We start making a change in the state and in the country. So don't lose the forest for the trees. Don't get so focused on the big picture you forget. Start with focusing on what is local. I'm not saying ignore what happens in Washington or in your state house, but focus on fixing things locally. Spend most of your effort there, because there you have a much better chance of having an impact. Yep, we the people have, Josh said, we the people have many responsibilities passed along. Yes, we have. And it's time to take them back. And it's going to take work, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take effort, and it's going to take money. Which brings you to that question. What is your liberty worth? What will you pay? What promise does the government have to give you for you to give up your liberty? Sadly, it seems like a lot of people, that promise is pretty light. But hopefully more and more of us will start seeing that price tag go up and up and up until people are no longer willing to pay it. So I want to thank everybody who joined live. Everybody that's watching a recording, yeah, it's a little sketchier because it's live. You get me raw and in person. I thank you for taking the time. Remember the idea of focusing locally. Hopefully you'll be engaged. Sign up on the website, be involved, sign up for the newsletter, follow on Facebook, share the meeting, share my videos, share my articles. Let's find more ways to engage each other. Consider joining my scholar group. I have a constitutional scholar group where we do some more discussions about things between ourselves. Consider that. Consider having me talk to one of your groups, either in person or over Zoom. We live in a wonderful time. Let's use these liberties that we have to help advance the cause of liberty. And I hope that this was interesting, involving, engaging, and I really hope to see you again the next time on the Constitution Study. Thank you, everyone.
Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.